right. So, um, Cash App,
Yeah.
splitting dinner bills,
Yeah.
paying the dog walker. It's
Yeah.
everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And it's so easy.
Yeah, it is.
But, behind all those like quick taps and transfers, there's this whole other world
Oh, yeah.
of financial rules and regulations.
Right.
And, most of us never even think about it.
Right.
But when those rules get broken, things can get French. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today we are going to deep dive into a case where things went a little bit wrong.
Okay.
The recent settlement between Block Inc., the company behind Cash App, and 48 U.S. states.
Wow.
Apparently, they weren't exactly following the rules when it came to preventing money laundering.
That's right. And you know what's really fascinating about this deep dive is
What's that?
we're actually using the legal settlement document as our source.
Oh, wow. So we're getting like a
behind-the-scenes look.
behind the scenes.
Yeah, at how these investigations play out.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into like all the details of the settlement,
Yep.
let's talk about like the basics.
Okay.
What is money laundering?
Yeah, so imagine a criminal makes a bunch of money illegally, maybe from drug trafficking or something like that.
Okay.
They can't just spend that money openly, right? It would raise too many red flags.
Right.
So they have to find a way to clean the money.
Oh.
To make it look like it came from legitimate sources.
Ah.
That's money laundering.
So they're basically taking their dirty money and running it through like a washing machine to
Exactly.
make it look clean.
Exactly. And that's where things like the Bank Secrecy Act or BSA come into play.
Okay.
The BSA is a federal law that requires financial institutions to have systems in place to detect and prevent money laundering.
So that's where these like anti-money laundering programs or AML programs.
Exactly. AML programs are like the rule book for financial institutions.
Got it.
Outlining all the steps they need to take to comply with the BSA. Think of it like a security system for the financial world.
Okay, so Cash App. How does Cash App fit into all this?
Well, with over 50 million users in the U.S., Cash App handles a ton of transactions every day.
Right.
And the BSA says that any company that transmits money like Cash App needs to have strong AML programs in place.
Makes sense.
They need to be able to spot suspicious activity and report it to the authorities.
Okay, so what did Block Inc. do wrong? What were the AML failures that led to this settlement?
Well, the settlement document itself is pretty interesting because Block Inc. doesn't actually admit or deny any wrongdoing. It's a common legal tactic in these types of agreements.
So they're basically saying, we're not saying we did anything wrong,
Right.
but we'll pay to make this go away.
Exactly. But even though they don't admit to specific violations, the settlement document does give us some hints about what might have gone wrong.
Okay.
There are mentions of insufficient staffing, outdated systems, and a lack of proper oversight.
So it sounds like they might have been cutting corners when it came to AML compliance.
It's possible. And, what's important to note here is this wasn't just discovered by chance. This was a coordinated investigation led by financial regulators in 8 states.
8 states?
Yeah.
Wow, so this was a pretty big deal.
Absolutely. California, Colorado, Kentucky, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Ohio, Texas, and Washington were all involved.
Wow.
They were looking specifically at Block Inc.'s compliance with the BSA and AML regulations.
So it's not like they just got like a random audit.
Right.
This was targeted.
Targeted, yeah.
Right.
And that tells us that regulators are taking AML compliance very seriously.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to go after companies, even big ones like Block Inc., if they suspect violations.
And this wasn't just like a slap on the wrist either? What were the consequences?
Well, first of all, there's the hefty fine.
Yeah.
$80 million to be exact.
80 million.
Divided among the states involved in the investigation.
Oh, wow.
Some states like California, Massachusetts, and Texas received larger shares because of their lead roles in the investigation.
Ouch. $80 million. That's
Yeah.
gotta hurt. Even for a company like Block Inc.
Yeah, but the fine is just the beginning. The settlement also mandates that Block Inc. hire an independent consultant to assess their AML program and recommend improvements.
So they're getting like an AML makeover courtesy of the state regulators?
Yeah, you could say that.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall for those meetings.
It's a pretty significant step. This consultant will have the power to really dig into their systems, policies, and procedures to identify weaknesses and make sure they're actually following the rules.
And Block Inc. can't just ignore the consultant's recommendations, right?
Right. They have to create a corrective action plan based on the consultant's findings.
Okay.
And implement it within 12 months.
So it's not just a one-time fix.
Right.
They're being forced to make long-term changes to their AML program.
Exactly. They have to show regulators that they're serious about preventing money laundering on their platform.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of money laundering,
Yeah.
the Bank Secrecy Act,
Right.
the specifics of blocking settlement.
Yeah.
But what does all this mean for like the average person? Why should our listeners care about this?
That's a great question. I think there are a couple of key takeaways here.
Okay.
First, it highlights the importance of AML regulations.
Okay.
These rules aren't just abstract legal concepts.
Right.
They're in place to protect us from real-world harms, like terrorism, drug trafficking, and other criminal activities.
So even though most of us never see, the inner workings of these AML programs, they're actually playing a crucial role in keeping us safe.
Absolutely. And the second takeaway is that it reminds us to be more aware of the companies we trust with our money.
Okay.
We often use these financial platforms without giving much thought to their security practices.
Right. It's so easy to just like download an app and start sending money without really considering,
Yeah, and this settlement is a reminder that even big, well-known companies like Block Inc. can fall short when it comes to compliance.
So what can our listeners do to protect themselves? Should we all be AML experts now?
That's a great question, and luckily you don't need to be an expert.
Oh.
We'll dive into some practical steps you can take in the next part of our deep dive.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. So you're saying we don't need to become AML experts overnight,
No.
but we should be more aware of the companies that we trust with our money.
Right.
So where do we even start with that?
Well, a little bit of knowledge can go a long way.
Okay.
You don't need to be an expert, but understanding the basics can help you make more informed choices.
So no pop quizzes on the Bank Secrecy Act then?
No pop quizzes.
Okay, good.
But one thing to remember is that term we mentioned earlier, customer due diligence.
Okay.
It's a big part of AML compliance.
Okay.
Basically, companies are supposed to know who their customers are and what they're doing with their money.
So it's not enough to just download an app and start sending money.
Right. Think of it this way. When you open a bank account, they ask for a ton of information, right?
Yeah.
Your ID, your social security number, proof of address.
Right.
They're doing that to verify your identity and make sure you're not trying to open an account under false pretenses.
Right. So even with these apps, we should be thinking about what information they're asking for and why.
Exactly. And if something feels off, if they're not asking enough questions, or if they're asking for information that seems unnecessary, that could be a red flag.
So it's kind of like we have to be detectives in our own financial lives.
I like that analogy.
Well, yeah.
We need to be observant and ask questions.
Yeah.
Another important thing to remember is that AML programs are all about detecting suspicious activity.
Okay. But what does suspicious activity even look like in the world of Cash App?
Yeah.
I'm imagining shady figures in trench coats making large cash deposits in dark alleys.
Well, it's not always that dramatic.
Okay.
Suspicious activity could be anything that seems out of the ordinary or doesn't make sense.
Okay.
For example, a sudden spike in transactions, large transfers to or from unknown accounts, or unusual patterns of activity.
So if I suddenly start receiving thousands of dollars from a random Cash App user in a foreign country,
Yeah.
red flag.
Definitely. And that's where our responsibility as consumers comes in.
Okay.
If you notice something suspicious on your own account, you should report it to the app or platform immediately.
Okay. So we've talked about customer due diligence, suspicious activity.
Right.
What else can our listeners do to be more informed about the financial services they're using?
Well, remember that website we mentioned earlier, the Nationwide Multi-State Licensing System, or NMLS?
Right, the NMLS Consumer Access website.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource for checking up on financial companies.
Okay, but what kind of information can you actually find there?
A lot, actually. You can see if a company is properly licensed to operate in your state.
Oh, okay.
Check their history of enforcement actions and even file a complaint if you've had a negative experience.
So before I download the latest fintech app or sign up for a new service, I should check them out on NMLS.
It's definitely a good idea. Think of it like checking the reviews before you buy a product online.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're dealing with a reputable company.
Makes sense. So it's all about doing our homework, being observant, asking questions.
Uh-huh.
But what about the bigger picture here? What does this Block Inc. settlement say about the fintech industry as a whole?
That's a great question. And I think it highlights a real tension in the fintech world.
Okay.
On the one hand, you have this incredible innovation happening, new apps, platforms, and services popping up all the time,
Right.
making it easier than ever to manage our money.
It feels like there's a new fintech unicorn every week,
Right.
promising to revolutionize the way we bank, invest, and spend.
Exactly. But this rapid growth can sometimes come at the expense of robust compliance systems.
Interesting.
It's like building a race car that can go 200 miles an hour without making sure the brakes work properly.
So the excitement of innovation can sometimes overshadow the less glamorous but very essential aspects of like security and compliance.
Right, and that's where regulators come in.
Okay.
They have to strike a delicate balance, encouraging innovation while also ensuring that these companies are playing by the rules and protecting consumers.
Yeah, it sounds like a tough job. How can regulators keep up with this like rapidly evolving industry and make sure these companies aren't cutting corners?
Well, I think we're seeing that play out right now with the Block Inc. settlement. Regulators are sending a clear message that AML compliance is non-negotiable no matter how big or innovative a company may be.
So it's like a wake-up call to the entire industry. You can't just prioritize growth and innovation at the expense of compliance.
Exactly, and I think we're going to see more scrutiny and enforcement actions in the future as regulators try to keep pace with this dynamic industry.
So what does this mean for the future of fintech? Is this a sign that the industry is headed for like a crackdown?
I don't think it's necessarily a crackdown, but it's definitely a signal that the Wild West days of fintech are coming to an end. Companies are realizing that they need to invest in robust compliance programs if they want to stay in the game.
So it's not just about creating a cool app or offering the lowest fees anymore. They have to prove that they can operate responsibly and keep their users' money safe.
Absolutely. And I think that's ultimately a good thing for consumers. As the industry matures, we should see higher standards of security and compliance, which will benefit everyone.
So it sounds like this blocking settlement is just one chapter in a larger story about the evolution of fintech and, these ongoing efforts to find that balance between innovation and regulation.
Exactly. And as consumers, we have a role to play in this story, too. By being informed, asking questions, and demanding accountability, we can help shape the future of fintech and ensure that it serves us all responsibly.
Well said. Now, I know we've talked a lot about the responsibilities of like companies and regulators. But I kind of want to shift gears for a minute and talk about the ethical implications for us as consumers. What are your thoughts on that?
That's an important point to consider. I think this case raises some interesting ethical questions about our own behavior as users of these platforms.
Like give us an example.
Well, for instance, knowing that a company like Block Inc. has had issues with AML compliance, does that change your perception of them or your willingness to use Cash App?
That's a really good question. It definitely makes me think twice about, where my money is going and who's handling it.
And it goes beyond just this one case. We're constantly making choices about which financial services we use. Often based on convenience cost or features, but how much weight should we give to ethical considerations?
So it's not just about getting the best deal or the coolest app. It's also about supporting companies that align with like our values.
Exactly. And that can be a tricky balance to strike. Sometimes the most convenient or affordable option might not be the most ethical one.
I think it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of new technology and forget about the human impact, both positive and negative. So how can we as individuals become more mindful of these ethical considerations when we're making like financial decisions?
That's a question I think we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into some specific strategies and resources that can help you navigate the ethical landscape of fintech.
We've been talking about this balancing act, between innovation and ethical practices in the fintech world. It feels like a lot to think about, especially when we're just trying to like pay our bills or split a lunch tab. How can we as individuals like really make a difference when these systems seem so big and complex?
It's easy to feel like our individual choices don't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. But I think, it's important to remember that we're not just passive consumers. In this system, we have power. Both through our individual choices and our collective voices.
So how do we actually exercise that power? What can we do beyond just like, checking a company's rating on NMLS?
Well, one powerful tool is simply asking questions. When you're considering using a new fintech service, don't be afraid to reach out to their customer support or look for information on their website about their security practices, their commitment to ethical data handling, or their stance on AML compliance.
So it's about being proactive and doing our own research instead of just like blindly trusting whatever a company tells us.
And if you're not satisfied with the answers you get, or if you feel like a company isn't being transparent enough, you can always choose to take your business elsewhere.
Right.
That sends a powerful message.
It's like voting with our wallets.
Exactly.
We can support the companies that align with our values and hold the others accountable.
Right. And beyond individual actions, there's also strength in collective action.
Okay.
Don't underestimate the power of raising awareness, engaging in conversations, and advocating for change.
So things like talking to our friends and family about these issues, sharing articles on social media, or even like contacting our elected officials.
Absolutely. The more we talk about these issues, the more we raise awareness and put pressure on companies and regulators.
Right.
To prioritize ethical practices, there are also a growing number of consumer advocacy groups and organizations that are focused on promoting responsible innovation in the fintech space.
So you're not alone in this.
No, you're not alone.
There are resources and communities out there that can help us kind of navigate these complexities.
Right.
And make our voices heard.
Absolutely. And remember, this is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
The landscape of fintech is constantly evolving, and so are the ethical challenges we face.
Right.
It's up to all of us to stay informed, engage in dialogue, and demand better from the companies and systems that shape our financial lives.
It's almost like we're all part of this giant experiment in financial innovation.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility to, like, ensure that this experiment benefits everyone, not just a select few.
I like that way of thinking about it. It's about creating a future of finance that is not only innovative and efficient, but also ethical, inclusive, and sustainable.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of, AML compliance, block Inc. settlement, and the ethical considerations surrounding fintech, I hope our listeners feel more informed.
Yeah.
Empowered, and maybe even a little bit inspired to make a difference.
I agree. It's been a fascinating journey, and I think it's clear that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of finance.
Yeah.
By staying curious, asking questions, and demanding better, we can create a financial system that works for everyone.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you learned something new and feel inspired to continue exploring these important issues. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.